author Dennis Lehane is considered by many the greatest writer of crime fiction of his generation. He is an author that's had several adaptations, and his books are beloved by millions. Mystic River, Shutter Island, the Kenzie and Gennaro novels. But there's a series of his that is kind of a series, kind of not a series, that I think flies under the radar and shouldn't. And those are the Coughlin novels. And the Coughlin novels consist of The Given Day, Live by Night, and World Gone By. And these are three books that are worth your time, and I want to talk about them today. These three books highlight the things that Lehane does so very well. As most great writers of crime fiction, they are perfectly plotted. He's so great at just keeping a narrative momentum that keeps going forward, but doesn't ever seem rushed. Additionally, those plots always weave their way into some of the most memorable endings of books that I can remember. You may not love the end of a Lehane book, but you won't forget it. He's great at writing character. He creates characters you'll cheer for. He creates villains that you will loathe. And perhaps the most underrated thing about Lehane is his writing style, which I find quite elegant. I feel that he has a great ear for dialogue. He is great at metaphor, and just his use of the English language is superb. And frankly, a little better than you usually see in this genre. So I want to talk about these three novels that kind of fly under the radar and recommend them to you. I have to give you an overview first, though, because even though this is technically, according to GOODREADS and other places, they list it as a trilogy, this is not a trilogy. I've been very deliberate in saying that these are the Coughlin novels. This is not the Coughlin trilogy, because these three books could stand alone. I wouldn't recommend you read them by themselves. I think reading all three of them is the way to go. But I want to give you a little bit of background about the series as a whole before I delve into just my short review and thoughts about all three of these books. So the first book is called The Given Day, and this is set in 1918, and the main protagonist is Danny Coughlin, and Danny Coughlin is a cop in Boston. Despite that, this is not a work of crime fiction. This is a work of historical fiction, and this deals with a lot of the political and social upheavals that were happening in America in 1918 at the end of World War I, and is more about that than the fact that the main character is a cop. So that's the first book, and it does stand alone very well by itself. The second book, Live by Night, is following Danny's little brother Joe, and it's set about a decade after the events of The Given Day, and this is a work of crime fiction. Joe is not a cop, Joe's a criminal. And it's kind of a coming-of-age tale of his early days as a criminal, as you see him go from kind of petty criminal and get embroiled into some of the organized crime families that are around in Boston. And then the third book, World Gone By, also follows Joe, and this one is set in 1942, and it's kind of Joe in his late 30s dealing with the repercussions of his life of crime. And these three books work really well together despite the big time gaps in between them, but you could read them alone. I will say that my favorite of the three was The Given Day. It's a historical fiction tour de force. I love the thematic elements of what was going on in society, as well as discussions of power, which I'll talk about when I talk about this book by itself. That was my favorite. My second one was probably World Gone By. This is the thinnest volume. And there's a cover blurb that I want to share by Stephen King, and he says, this is the best gangster novel since The Godfather. And I pretty much agree with him. This is a fantastic, kind of lean storytelling, but it perfectly encapsulates what Lehane does very well from a plotting and pacing standpoint. And this Serpentine plot takes you through quite a journey. Now, the one in the middle is probably my least favorite of the three, but I still really enjoyed it, and that is Live by Night. And again, this is the beginning of Joe's story. So if you read World Gone By itself, you wouldn't get the beginning of Joe's story, so you probably would have a little bit of a lack of depth of character that you would get so much more if you read this one. So you could very easily read these two together as kind of a duology. If you wanted to just read Live by Night without reading The Given Day, or the duology without having read The Given Day, the only things you will miss a bit of background in the Coughlin family, which is a dysfunctional family, And you'll see some of the events that happen in the given day, which kind of starts to lead Joe down this life of crime. So you will get a little bit of background information that would make the reading experience a lot more richer, in my opinion, if you go into this one having read The Given Day, but it's not essential. Danny does appear in this book, but it's more of a cameo than anything. This is really Joe's duology of these two. So that's kind of an overview. Let's go ahead and talk about The Given Day by Dennis Lehane. This is an historical fiction tour de force. And I talked about how this is dealing with kind of national, political, and societal changes going on in America. This is the end of World War I, and there's so much at play. We have a big rise in immigration, so you see a lot of immigration affecting the people that have been here longer, and it really affects this story quite a bit. The other thing that I found very interesting about this is this in many ways is just a discussion upon power and power structures, and it's a meditation upon who has power and who doesn't. And Danny Coughlin, as a protagonist here, kind of encapsulates both ends of that spectrum. He is a police officer, so as in society, police officers are generally revered. He has a good standing in society and a good place in society. He comes from an Irish Catholic family who has its roots in America a couple generations, so he has that advantage over a lot of the other inhabitants in Boston. So he has kind of he's on the good side of this kind of power spectrum. But there are other things that he shows kind of the other side of the coin. Police officers in Boston at this time, it was not a glamorous job. They had not had a raise in about 15 years. He was living just at the poverty level. In fact, he was so poor that he was living in the Italian part of town, which was a worse part of town, at least according to his Irish cops that he was friends with and his Irish family. His father was a cop as well. So cops at this time were living at the poverty level. At one point, Danny says that he could quit his job, become a janitor, and he would make a lot more money and have a more comfortable life. Additionally, at the time, police officers had to work 40 or 50 days in a row, often 12-hour days, and they were dealing with precincts that were vermin and rat-infested, disease-infested places. And a lot of these police officers, because of just these dirty work environments, would often get sick and ill, and they'd miss days of work without getting paid. It was really a very tough time to be a police officer in that regard. So you kind of see Danny on this other side of this kind of power spectrum as I'm talking about it. There are a couple other characters here. There's another main character named Luther, who's a black man, who of course is on the lower end of the power spectrum that I'm talking about here. Just because of his race, he is almost a second-class citizen. Same thing with a female character who comes to the forefront as a background character. Same thing there. So we get to see a lot of the differences of power between these different individuals throughout this story. And Luther's story and Danny's story intertwine in a really meaningful way partway through this book, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But you can see very much in this living that Danny has and this tough life as a cop that he wants there to be a better way. And in 1918, we saw the rise of unions in America. But the institutions did not want the unions. They were very conservative. They were very against this. And the way that they tried to prevent this is that they would, through the press, just kind of vilify unionization of America, saying that, oh, this is socialism, this is Bolshevikism. And it really prevented Danny and these police officers from having a better life, from having even a clean precinct house to live in, because the institutions that were in charge of all of this, they had all the money, they wanted to keep all the money. They didn't see that this was a priority in their lives. I was very much struck by some parallels today, and that bothered me quite a bit, to be honest. But seeing this story evolve from where it starts about Danny's story and the societal things going on, it's a really brilliant book. It's early in the year. I'm filming this early February, but I really suspect when I get to the end of the year that this is going to be one of the best books that I read this year. If I would recommend one out of these three books, this would be the one. So the second book, Live by Night, which I erroneously called Live by Night earlier in a different video, it's Live by Night because there's a line in here where Joe Coughlin in his Life of Crime talks about how fine, upstanding citizens live by day and criminals like him live by night. And in many ways, this is a coming-of-age story. I think he's about 18 at the beginning of this story, so it's not like that kind of coming-of-age story, but you see how his life evolves from kind of just a petty street criminal who's not doing any major crimes, how it starts to snowball into some bigger things. I really like Joe as a character because he's one of those characters that is very intelligent and very proficient, but not all the time. He often makes some really dumb choices and stupid decisions. And a lot of times when Lehane doesn't spell it out for you right away, you're wondering if it's going to be a good decision or a bad decision. I liked that aspect of this book quite a bit. The other thing that I like is as we see kind of Joe evolving into getting involved with kind of this organized crime family, how he never sees himself as a gangster, and he thinks that he's just kind of an outlaw, where he's just doing these things to survive. And I love kind of the inner thoughts that he has about when he's thinking about all of these things as he's doing, as his life starts to go into kind of this path of maybe becoming a gangster himself. This was, of the three, probably my least favorite of the three, but I still really liked it. I would not dissuade anybody from picking it up. It has a truly remarkable ending. Again, one of those endings with Lehane, you may not love it, but you'll remember it. And this was a really great story. Went down very, very fast, despite being about 400 pages. The third book is World Gone By, and again, this continues Joe's story. And as I mentioned, the cover blurb about this being a gangster novel, yes, at this point, Joe pretty much is a gangster for one of the Italian mob families from Boston. Although this is set in Tampa, because it has to do with bootlegging and all of that because of Prohibition. This is set much later. It's set in 1942. What I love about this one, and Live by Night, I said it wrong again, Live by Night, what I love about both of these books is the discussion upon these gangsters. And Lehane makes it very real and very human. I think one flaw in telling stories like this, I think a lot of storytellers try to romanticize these figures. They were gangsters, oh, but they wore suits and they were family men and all of this. But some of them were stone cold killers, and a lot of them were thieves, and a lot of them were bullies. And he doesn't shy away from that, as especially in this book, as we see Joe in his mid to late 30s reflecting upon his life and wondering if he's a good person, wondering if he can be a good father because of the things that he's done in his life. And I love that realism. And I think so many times that we just paint a romantic lens on the gangsters of the past, forgetting that they were criminals. This is pretty fast-paced, but Lehane just marvels at lean storytelling. It doesn't seem like he's simplistic in his prose because it's quite beautiful. I mentioned earlier, he really has a way with words. He has a very great command of the language. And this serpentine plot went so many different directions that I really didn't know where it was going to end up. And where it ended up was truly fantastic. Probably another ending some of you might not like, but I thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I loved the end of Joe's story. I don't know if I would have loved it as much having not seen the beginning, but I did love the end of Joe's story. So out of these three books, I recommend all three of them. I recommend you read all three of them in the order that I laid them out. If you read just one, it probably would depend on whether you want to read a work of historical fiction or crime fiction. If you want to experience Lehane's crime fiction, World Gone By is fantastic. If you want to experience kind of a longer tale of historical fiction with kind of some deeper themes, you could pick up The Given Day, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. But all three of these books fly under the radar too far, in my opinion. I really enjoyed reading all of these last month, and it just rekindled for me just this love for this author that I hadn't read in a couple years. If you do like Lehane, later this year when I finally read his latest book, Small Mercies, I'll have read everything by him. So I will be doing kind of a longer form video talking about all of his books and giving entry point recommendations and just trying to give an overview of this author's great works, because I think he is an author that more people need to read. Hey, if you are a reader of Dennis Lehane, especially these 3 books, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk with you about these. Love to hear your thoughts on these 3 books as well. Just please label any spoilers in case anybody watching this and drifts into the comments doesn't get spoiled by any of the things in these books, especially the endings. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. All those links are below. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.